Every time we build and ship software, we learn something new. Understanding what worked and what didn't helps us build more confidently the next time around. That's why we're launching the Confident Commit newsletter. We want to help you make better, data-driven decisions. Subscribe today to Win It Software. CircleCI.com/newsletter.
Hello, and welcome to the Confident Commit, the podcast for anyone who wants to join the conversation on how to deliver software better and faster.
If you're looking to build a trusted ship, tune in, let's confidently commit.
I'm your host, Rob Zuber, CTO at CircleCI, the industry leader in all things CI and CD. Today, I'm joined by Laura Tacho, CTO at DX. Laura, thanks so much for joining me, particularly so late on a Friday evening. That's not when people are going to listen to it, but I think they ought to know that you're doing us a great solid.
I think anyone who's listening to this right now, just put your mindset on, it's 6 p.m. on a Friday. What are you doing? Talking to Rob Zuber about CI/CD and developer experience. It's a great way to end the week.
You know what? I hope that's still true at the end of this, but I'm looking forward to it. Thanks again for joining. All right, so let's kick things off. I want to talk about developer experience. I think it's huge. I think it's a huge topic on a lot of people's minds right now, and clearly you're an expert on the subject. Not to put you too on the spot. So let's kick things off. Super simple. Like, what does developer experience mean to you?
Yeah, you know what? I think everyone has a slightly different definition probably. When I'm talking about developer experience, what I'm talking about is how developers are thinking about, what they feel about, and how they value the work that they get done. And really, developer experience sort of encompasses how developers can be effective, how much friction they encounter. So it's anything from slow builds, flaky tests, to undefined tasks or changing priorities or being interrupted. So it's really everything that has to do with how a developer or a team of developers can be effective and productive or not.
Yeah, I think the breadth of that is what makes it so exciting. And I think it's a really important thing to point out because we can get very honed in on one particular point. You know, we build this podcast as faster and better, delivering software better and faster. And when we actually stop and think about that, we're like, wow, it's everything, right? Everything about software delivery impacts your experience and your ability to get things done. Do you think there's a reason that developer experience is such a hot topic with engineering leaders right now, sort of in this market or in this current state?
Yeah, I think definitely there is sort of a macroeconomic force on organizations right now where they're looking at how much they're investing in engineering organizations and wanting to make sure that they're not overspending, that their organizations are performing efficiently and effectively. Just to, engineering leaders need to show that we're good stewards of budget and doing things the right way. And I think, quite honestly, a lot of engineering leaders have never been in that position before. We've been sort of like the, as Charity Majors said in a recent talk I saw of hers, like the artistes of the organization, where maybe not this, at the CTO or VP level, but a lot of senior leaders might not have been asked to show the numbers or give the metrics before. And now that's an ask of them because of the broader macroeconomic situation here. I also think, though, kind of like on the other side of things, engineering leaders just generally want to provide an environment where engineers can get work done in a very effective way without friction. It's like, it's the right thing to do, and it also happens to be the right thing for business. So developer experience is sort of straddling these two worlds of like the business world, but also just the right thing to do engineering wise. And it's gaining a lot of popularity and has gained a lot of popularity in the last 2-3 years. I think sort of, we had like the DevOps bubble, and this, I feel like it's sort of a continuation of it. It's a lot of the same ideas, a lot of the same practitioners.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Like, I love the scenarios, and they're not that far, like they're not that few and far between, I guess, where the right thing for the business and the right thing to do are aligned. It's usually a lot easier for everyone to work on, right? Like, developers having the highest potential impact on business outcomes clearly good for the business. And the things that prevent that from being true are often the things that, they're in that list that you sort of spoke about from a developer experience perspective. They're the negatives on that front, right? High levels of friction, unclear requirements, slow build times, flaky tests, the whole gamut. All of that is preventing them from putting their time and energy into really impacting the outcomes of the business. And, if you think purely financially, right? You described it as engineering leaders or engineers and sort of clear number accountability. You put that in an ROI spreadsheet and we've got a lot of questions. So the fact that making an experience that's more fun and more fulfilling and all those things for an engineer also means more, means better business outcomes and sort of greater business outcomes, I think is a great thing for everybody. And it's nice to be able to rally around that.
Yeah. I mean, teams and organizations that have poor developer experience not only struggle really with retaining engineering talent, but the ability to innovate just drops so rapidly. And if your business stops innovating, it's going to die. So the developer experience isn't just like a nice to have. It's not warm, fuzzy feelings because we want our developers who, already have pretty high salaries. We want them to feel good about their foosball tables and free drinks. That's not what this is about. I like any, elder geriatric millennial, I just rewatched The Office for the 18th time. And there's a part where they get a new copier because every single time they went to the copy machine, it's broken and they spent more time fixing it than actually achieving their task. And I just think about how many times I felt like that back when I was an individual contributor of I could have had this done in a fraction of the time, but my tooling or just tech debt, all these other factors are just in my way and providing so much friction that it took me 5 times as long to do it. And eliminating that, upgrading the copier in the office, or providing a better developer experience isn't just about making developers feel good about their job. Of course, that's it's the right thing to do, but it's also aligned very strongly to business outcomes. You can't function as best as you can in an environment where there's just friction preventing you from being very effective.
Yeah, I strongly agree. I want to get into kind of how you think about it and what you've looked at. But before we do, I'm actually curious, just you named the copier, which is probably not the biggest issue for most developers. But do you have any examples of really surprising impacts on developer experience that you've come across where you thought, wow, I never really would have thought that was the thing that was keeping people from getting work done, but that really maybe changed your perspective about what kinds of things to look for?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question actually right now because DX and Atlassian worked together on a State of DevX report. And what we found was that even, in the best circumstances, you have an engineering leader who is very in tune with their development team, really wants to provide good developer experience. Developers still think that their engineering leadership tier doesn't get it, doesn't really understand what's standing in their way. And a lot of times it's things like documentation and just taking so long to find answers to stuff that takes up and provides the worst, very poor developer experience where engineering leaders might think it's it's tooling problems or other things. And so if you read through that report, there's a lot more detail on what developers actually have problems with versus what managers think that their problems are. Even in the best scenario where the manager is trying to be very in tune, there's still quite a gap between what's actually going on. I think one of the lessons that I learned very early in my journey of caring about developer experience, I think maybe we didn't talk about that, but Rob, you and I were competitors for a long time because I was at CodeShip and then I worked at CloudBees, and I've been in CI/CD, obviously not as long as you because now I'm not working in CI/CD anymore, but working on those teams, trying to help teams get better, deliver better software faster. Looking internally into my own team, I had certain value judgments of what I thought developers were or were not struggling with. And I just, for quite a long time, I didn't want to listen to what my developers were telling me because I thought I knew better. I guess it comes down to well, I don't think that getting your PRs reviewed in 24 hours is that big of a problem because I've had experiences where it takes 3 days. But for my developers, like, well, but we're used to it being 2 hours and now it's taking a day and this feels like forever and it's really causing a lot of friction. So kind of divorcing what your own experiences are as an engineering leader, especially if you have a long background as an IC, and really listening to what your team is saying of like, no, this is real. This is standing in my way. This is creating friction. It's so important to do that and to really understand the voice of the developer and and just trust what they're telling you, because they're right. They're the ones experiencing it. And that's really kind of what developer experience comes down to. It's about the actual experiences of developers delivering software in your environment.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a fantastic insight, and it's a tricky one to work with, right? Like, absolutely you can pay attention to, you absolutely must pay attention to your developers and the things that they're struggling with. I think one of the things that I've tried every once in a while, and I will say it has mixed results, is like, try to do the work. I don't mean show up and take a ticket off a backlog and be like, cool, but just go see what it feels like to try to make a change in your system. And you'll learn so much. Now, are you going to find out that it takes 3 days to review a PR? Well, no, because you're going to put one up and everyone's going to be like, oh my God, I need to do that right away. But like, so you might not see it all, but there's something about, signal and data. And I want to talk about data versus surveying in a second, because I think those are very different. But it's easy to look at the data and jump to a conclusion. And there's something about just getting into it and getting a feel, like, what does it feel like to try to do this? And in particular, if you were, I've been at CircleCI coming up on 10 years. I wrote a lot of code when I first got here, right? So I have this mental picture of what it's like, and I can tell from a distance it's not the same now. There's the whole system has fundamentally changed in ways that are hard to enumerate. And that's true of the organization of the system, of the software that we work on, of the tools that we use. Like, everything has changed, so that bias will skew your perspective of what's really happening. So I think that's a great way to translate, or to transition, into, some of the stuff that at least I've heard you speak about, in particular around, the mixture of data and surveys. Like, a lot of people, want to sit in their office and look at data and conclude what people are experiencing. But a big part of what I've heard you speak about is surveys in particular, and getting that direct sort of prose, verbal feedback, whether it's, it's written, but whatever, of this is what's happening. This is what I'm experiencing. How do you kind of mix those two? What kind of value do you think you get out of each of those, sort of like the, hours to PR review versus what someone's telling you about the problem and the experience that they're having?
Yeah, I think surveys are really interesting because we can definitely capture sentiment, developer sentiment, like how satisfied they are with a particular thing, but you can also use it to capture workflow metrics. Because, sure, you can go to the CircleCI API and scrape data and figure out mean build times and all these different ways. But when you have an organization with, some complexity, teams use things in non-standardized ways, and it becomes kind of a difficulty where you could actually just go out and sample and be like, in the last week, how many failed builds did you have per week on average? And you might get like a not so precise number, but it's probably enough to directionally point you in the direction if you need that data to make a decision. And so I think surveys are an interesting tool to gather lots of different types of data, sentiment data. You can also gather workflow data in the same way that DORA does. The DORA metrics are surveys. At the same time, like, once you reach some level of maturity, system level metrics are going to be what you want to look toward to make sure that you're making progress in the right ways. So mixing them together, you can start to put into context, okay, well, my developers are saying they're dissatisfied with the ease of release, and I'm actually seeing red builds everywhere in my data coming from Circle or whatever it is. And so you can correlate those things, but then also ask a question, well, what else happened? Like, what else happened around that time? And we can start to correlate and triangulate and say, okay, well, ease of release went down, but also interruptions went up, or satisfaction with, thoroughly understanding business direction went down. And so we can start to put together a clear picture of like, well, if we want this number to increase over here, and we're looking for evidence in, build time or percentage of failed builds or MTTR or whatever it is that you're looking for, you can try to you can correlate some data and put together a story that gives you some actual levers to interrogate a little bit further, to try to move those levers and see what influence it has on your organization. And so putting those things together, the system metrics, workflow metrics, metrics about satisfaction, sentiment, perception of productivity, all together gives you such a comprehensive view of what's actually going on. Whereas one of those things by itself is only giving you part of the story.
Right. Yeah, I think that I've often thought about metrics and like particularly changes in metrics. Like that's often what I'm thinking about. Is like if this is steady, the actual number is probably not that interesting. But when there's shifts, that's telling me that something is changing or going on. Like maybe I expect the trend to be going one way, it's going the other. And that's a great time to ask some questions, right? Not great, I'll dig into more data, but that tells me something interesting has happened. Maybe there's a conversation to be had here. Maybe someone could tell me something about what's going on. Maybe it's completely innocuous. Few people went on vacation. That was completely expected. Maybe something really terrible is happening, or we can't figure out how to get this new piece of technology integrated, or our build's totally broken, whatever that might be. We need some help, right? And so I think that blend, again, I think some people like to sit and just look at the data and assume they can find everything, like numbers whisperers. I'm not sure how to describe it, but talking to people is very valuable. It's the short of it.
I mean, the truth is, and I've worked with, thousands of engineering leaders trying to get a metrics program off the ground, or they have one and they're trying to make it better. I have never encountered an engineering leader who found this mysterious thing in their metrics that was something brand new and undiscovered that their team didn't already know about. Because your team is in there in the tooling. It's their whole life. They know what's going on. And so I've never come across a scenario where there was this big missed opportunity that we only found because we were looking at system metrics, that the team wasn't already like, hey man, we got to fix this. Or hey, this is weird and it's happening because of this. Or hey, we had this thing happen the other week. And then, you can see the spikes go up or down or whatever. It's just not happened like that, even though I think as engineering leaders, because that's how I would debug my Kubernetes cluster or something. Be like, oh, I'm just going to look at all the telemetry data that I have. And, I'm going to find a spike that I didn't know was there. And I'm going to discover something new and novel that I can then go fix and avoid disaster and, get a round of applause. But with these organizational kind of socio-technical systems, like a software team where you've got people, but also systems, I found that it just doesn't really work like that. The people know. They're your early alert system. So just ask them and you'll save a bunch of time.
Yeah, I actually think of the leadership role there as the pattern matching, right? Teams have a really good understanding of what's happening in their team, but they often don't necessarily see that the same problem is occurring somewhere else. And so finding more sort of higher leverage systemic solutions is a great opportunity for a leader to participate in that conversation.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. I've now heard this same concern from this team. Can we do something that would help all of these teams instead of each of these teams trying to solve it for themselves? But would wholeheartedly agree on where the data is coming from, right? And that people know. Often, I don't know how consistent this is, and I'd be interested actually, given how many people you've worked with on this, but with some sense that to your earlier point that leadership doesn't understand or doesn't care about the challenges that I'm running into, either this is my responsibility to solve this problem, or no one cares and no one will let me solve this problem. So I'm just dealing with it all day, every day. I just accept that this is part of the drudgery of doing my job. When, as discussed, there's a lot of people that are very motivated to solve this, but maybe they don't have the visibility into it. And obviously that's a big part of what you're trying to do, is get people connected to that information.
Yeah, it's really hard. I think the cultural change, or sort of the change management piece of this, is a very difficult thing, because it is oftentimes a very new way of working, or a very different way of working than a lot of people are used to, where, you might give feedback on an employee engagement survey, and I don't know, where does that go? You never hear back. You never hear back about where that feedback goes. You don't see it tied to any kind of decision. You don't see the outcome or the result. But, if you're going to do a developer experience survey, you gotta have a plan of what you're going to do with that data, what decisions are going to be made with that data, who's going to see it, what happens next. And it can be very surprising then for developers to see that, oh, I gave input here, and now we've got, 15% of our time next quarter is allocated for this particular project to fix this. Or I'm being asked to build a business case around it instead of just complaining about it or giving my opinion about it. It's just like a different way. It's a different way of working that is unusual sometimes for some people and their experiences.
Well, I definitely think like action as a result is key. Where we can get buried in surveys.
Survey fatigue is real.
It's been a long time since I filled out a customer service survey. I will tell you that. Despite being randomly selected every time I call customer service to participate in their survey, I'm like, why would I believe that this is going to do anything? Like, I think that's the extreme example, right?
Yeah.
But it is totally real. And so, finding some quick wins and executing on them. Again, we talked about things that are good for everybody. That's definitely good for everybody. And finding, to elevate that, right? To your point, or like, hey, this looks like a pattern. I'll bring someone from this team and this team and this team. Let's get together and find a solution to this pattern. Yeah. I think is a great way to start building some motivation to unearth, the next things. Is there, we talked a little bit about surprising things that you've taken away. Is there anything that you think a lot of people miss when they think about this problem of developer experience? I mean, you raise kind of like feeling like better than everybody else, but as people get into it, maybe in that spectrum of things we've talked about, are there areas that people don't put enough focus in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does all depend on the company. I think a couple of interesting trends that I've seen, or I guess like one kind of global truth, if I could call it that, is that oftentimes the thing that your developers are least satisfied with is not the thing that they would necessarily fix first. And so that's a really interesting distinction between sentiment and priority. And if you don't capture both, you risk getting really distracted by the sentiment thing and chasing things that aren't actually going to have the biggest impact on your organization. An example is like a platform engineering team that is getting super strong negative feedback about service creation. It's taking 3-4 days to do. Pretty mild negative feedback about service updates. It's like, this takes 5 hours, 4 hours, whatever. The thing is, though, your teams are not creating new services every day, but they're probably updating them every day. And so the thing, the trick there is like, if you were just to get distracted by sentiment and chase down like, okay, we're really going to improve the service creation process. That's what the developers are saying is a huge point of friction. You're not going to realize, your return on investment of that particular project it's not going to be great. Whereas if you focus on taking something that's at, 60% and moving it up to 75%, you can actually make some incredible progress and reduce a lot of friction for engineering teams. So that's a really interesting thing that I think a lot of leaders don't necessarily think about because it's a little bit unintuitive, that the thing that's the highest or the lowest sentiment might not be actually the highest priority.
Yeah, I mean, the whole impact measurement, I think, is really interesting there. I don't know if you have I think of cost of delay, at least as one model for saying, of these things that we could do, right? What would be the impact? And particularly in developer experience, like how much developer time is this going to save us would be a quick way where you would do that calculation and say, how often are we doing this? How often are we like forcing yourself to do a tiny bit of math, like whiteboard, back of envelope type math would have make a huge difference, I think, in how you're looking at those things.
Yeah. What's surprising is most developers are wasting about 20% of their time. Whether it's friction.
Surprising to whom, not surprising to me at
actually,
all.
It's like crickets. Like, actually, no, it's only 20%. That's kind of what I thought. I was only 20%? Exactly. That's great.
Sounds great.
But yeah, if you think about that, I mean, as you said, like a little bit of math gets you some pretty big numbers, really quickly. And so if you think about 20% of time, that's a day a week. That's millions and millions of dollars and euros for companies that aren't even that big. That money really adds up quickly. And so being able to even like take that 20% down to like 19% or 18%, that adds up also just as quickly. And so trying to figure out like where are the opportunities, specifically which segments, which personas and cohorts of engineers are facing certain problems, like what can we build, what can we buy, what might not be even solved by a tooling problem, what's wrong with our processes. Because a lot of, as you said, like developer experience and software delivery is not just sitting at a computer and coding. I mean, as you and I know, and hopefully everyone else who's listening to this knows, but a lot of the problems actually come before a lot of the traditional metrics, which are mostly focused on, coding time, software delivery, DORA metrics, like releasing, deploys, etc. Before they even start to pick up on signal. It's like your tasks are poorly scoped, you're getting interrupted, your priorities are changing all the time. Those are the things that are extremely taxing, but they're so deeply ingrained into the way an organization behaves. Those are often the hardest to change as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can very rapidly deliver the wrong thing, right? And when you think about waste, it's not just time that you spend, but it's not time that you spend not coding, but you could literally be coding for weeks on something that doesn't matter because it was misunderstood or the customer feedback is incorrect, whatever. And so there's, when you really start to think about that, that's frustrating if we think about developer experience as the umbrella. I remember, this is a long time ago in the days of waterfall, but working with people who spent years building things that never even got into the hands of customers, and at some point we're just like, I can't work here anymore. I can't keep building things. Like I'm an engineer who builds things for customers. And if like customers aren't going to get it, then what's the point of what I'm doing? And so, that's a super extreme example. I think we've moved on from waterfall. Hopefully, if you're listening to this, like you have.
I think if you're listening to this, you probably have. But
it's that big, right? Like, yeah. Well, I mean, or maybe you want to,
maybe not.
Come on the show and talk about why you're still doing waterfall. I want to hear from you. But, that's the absolute extreme, but still like really working on the right thing is such a huge impact. And yes, you can have all the, like, my PRs get reviewed quickly and they get out to production and we deploy, on demand and all that kind of stuff. But if that's not the thing that is driving the business, then you still have issues. So you can work further and further, kind of back up the chain. I wanted to go back to one other thing, and then I'm gonna introduce a new segment in a second here. I just want people to anticipate that because it's exciting. But on the service creation service update point, I thought that was a really interesting example, specifically because I recently read this book, The Friction Project, which I don't know how much I would recommend it. I thought it was okay. I thought there were some interesting takeaways. Every book has interesting takeaways. But they talk about intentionally introducing friction in certain places because that's beneficial to the organization as well. And I think like service creation is a really interesting one for me, particularly when you hear the stories of companies like Uber pretty notoriously had thousands of services in different stacks and different languages. It was obviously very easy, right?
Yeah.
But the outcome was a huge amount of friction and overhead for the organization because they had lost sort of control and visibility into what was even happening in their systems. And so certain things you actually want to be hard. You just want it to be clear to people how we go about doing this. Like, here's the process for knowing that this is a thing we want to do. Once we decide we want to do it, it should be easy. But sometimes you want the decision to do something to actually be more difficult so that you can ensure that there's real alignment about what the goals are, right? And I think that there's another, I'll pick Uber because I also think it was covered in that book a little bit, but it wasn't new to me. But there are many companies you can meet who are sort of like, we've lost control of our system. There's so many different pieces in here. We don't know how they talk to each other, et cetera. And so actually introducing some overhead, which we haven't really talked about, is sometimes beneficial. All right. Well, I think this is the perfect time to, we're going to try out something new on the show. And I think this conversation is the perfect time to try it. We're going to call it the green build feeling. And I want you to give me an example of the last time that you've had that and what we mean, if you're not, oh, well, whatever. I guess people probably do CI if they're listening to this too. But like I think as engineers, we love rapid feedback. And particularly when it's positive, right? It's this little dopamine hit of like, oh, great. There's nothing here I didn't expect. It's going the way I planned. I've got the bill, and now I'm ready to put up my PR because I know this stuff works or whatever. And even if you think about like TDD, right? Like it broke. Oh, I fixed it. It's green. Like there's that little dopamine hit that kind of builds momentum and excitement. We were talking about small wins earlier. So do you have an example of something recently for you that sort of filled you with that quick win? Like, oh, I'm making momentum. I'm getting the green build sort of dopamine hit.
Oh yeah, I think that's such a good segment, that green build feeling. So at DX, we're working with Dr. Nicole Forsgren, who most of you know from Dora. Margaret Enstory co-authored the space framework. Abi, co-founder of DX, myself, and a few other researchers on finding some way to put developer experience into better context to better support CTOs as they're trying to advocate for developer experience within their orgs, and also trying to more comprehensively report on their engineering organizations. And so instead of just focusing on developer experience, we're putting it in context of like speed, quality, effectiveness, but also business impact, and coming up with ways to help leaders track the right things so that they have this really comprehensive but straightforward, easy to understand story. And we've been kind of giving a preview to some leaders. We can talk about it later, Rob, if you want to see it actually. But getting some really positive feedback about, oh man, I wish I had this 6 months ago. I wish I had this in my last meeting. And that's like, those little dopamine receptors just light up. It's great to sort of go deep into a problem, come up with something really simple, and then show it to the person that you're trying to help and have them say like, oh yeah, this is totally the right thing. So definitely a green build feeling. Very excited about getting that out in the front of the world as well.
Awesome. Love it. Well, I mean, we laughed about waterfall, but what I think we love about modern software delivery in general is fast feedback, positive feedback, and even the like, oh, it's not quite right, but oh, cool, I corrected quickly and I turned this into something of value, right? And so to be able to do that in something that's maybe not, delivering a software product, but working on something with this group and getting stuff out in front of leaders and helping them understand and getting that positive feedback, like, yeah, this is on the right track, like kind of early pieces, again, sort of quick feedback. So much about that positive response. It's just, like I said, it's fulfilling, right? It's nice. It's enjoyable to kind of move forward and feel like you're making wins and making progress.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Well, yes, I gave you a thumbs up earlier, but this is an audio program, so I just realized for anyone who's listening, I made a thumbs up.
There was a thumbs up.
Now you can visualize it. Yeah. Super excited to hear more about it. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for joining me, Laura. This has been amazing, not surprising. Thanks to everyone who's listening. If there's someone that you want us to talk to, something you want us to talk about, find us on Twitter, but X, I don't know, whatever that thing is now. Find us somewhere else. You can find me on LinkedIn and tell me about it. It's CircleCI on Twitter, me, Rob Zuber on LinkedIn. You'll find us somehow. If you enjoy the podcast, subscribe on your podcast provider of choice. Laura, thank you again for joining. Thank you for taking this time late on your Friday evening. It's been amazing. And it's been just such a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Always a pleasure.
Also, if you're interested in more of this content, you should check out our new Confident Commit newsletter. You can find it under CircleCI on LinkedIn and subscribe today.